Hello and welcome to the 2018 edition of the Columbus Report. I'm Jason Grzegorek, your host, and I'm very fortunate to have, as the beginning of the year rings in, Representative Deaver from the 28th District. Mr. Deaver,
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Glad you can join us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Taking a little bit of a break, I understand, obviously.
Well, we're right back at it. I mean, not in Columbus this week, but next week we'll be up there full swing. This week's pretty busy, though. We have capital budget coming up, and so those are conversations that we're having this week. Well,
you know, we like to get things rolling, as always, at the beginning of the year, try to get things ready for the new year for you and for those who are watching. We ran into one another for Ray Hodges' retirement, which was a sad thing. I mean, a good thing, not a sad thing, but a man who has definitely put in his time, so to speak.
Yeah, he served the community very, very well over the years. I was joking with his wife a little bit, and she said, well, I'll have to give him the lower level of the house officially. And Ray was laughing, and he said, well, hey, it's an improvement.
At least he gets to be in the house, let's put it that way.
Well, if he's not out walking around, I'm sure, knowing Ray, he'll be involved.
Absolutely. One of the things that you brought to my attention during that time was something that you had just recently dropped, which was House Bill 439, that you and Representative Mr. Ginter had put together in regards to bail reform.
Yes,
now,
sir.
obviously, people are going, this is a really deep subject for the beginning of the year, but it is going to make a big impact were this to pass. This is some great things. Now, people are asking, why bail? Obviously, jail and reform has always been a top topic here at the Round Table. Senator Seitz was always one of my favorite conversations to always have, is like to discuss the prisons and the jail system.
Sure.
But let's talk about something before they even get there, and
right.
that's that release. This is to change the idea, as I was reading, kind of making it fair playing ground for everyone now. What brought this about? Obviously, there's got to be a spark, and you are a man of many stories. There's got to be a spark in there somewhere.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, I view this very simply. I mean, one of the things that we've talked about over the last 3-4 years, as we've kind of discussed broad strokes of policy, is that we have a responsibility to take care of those that can't take care of themselves, and then provide pathways that provide opportunities for folks. And when you look at the criminal justice system, there is no doubt, as a practicing lawyer, but also someone who's involved with the system, there is no doubt that people who have little economic means end up doing a lot of time for non-jailable offenses. Our county courthouses are jammed with folks that are sitting in there waiting on a bond, and a lot of times they can't afford the $100, $200 that it's going to take to get them out. You think about it, these are misdemeanor cases. There's a lot of cases that are non-jailable,
right,
that are just generic misdemeanors by default, that you end up doing jail time for something that you won't do jail time for, even if you're found guilty. So the mere fact that you're sitting in the jailhouse for something that is at most finable is mind-boggling.
Especially as we get into the unclassified, minor gambling offenses or expired license to that point.
Right. Right.
Scary thoughts.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a prime example that was hit the newspaper out of the Dayton Daily, where a young man was inappropriately dressed and violated some dress code that does not exist, was the charge.
Okay.
And he was waiting for a bus so that he could go home. And he was arrested, put in jail. It took several days before his mother could put the money together, and she had to go get a short-term installment loan with a high interest rate to get her son out for $150 for an offense that A, was not even accurate, B, wasn't even true, that was later dismissed, and he did jail for it. And the only reason why he did jail was because he didn't have the $150 to get himself out of jail that day.
And now that's on his record.
Forever.
Forever.
Correct.
Which is, again, as you said, these are stories that we've brought up to the table before, about these unfortunate stories that kind of spark these ideas that we're trying to pass forward to make good or make better. It's definitely something that we need to definitely look at. Bail reform, or at least bail right now, is currently based on the nature of the offense. Obviously makes sense. The new reform is now going to morph that around a little bit, so to speak. Looking at it with a risk assessment with risk assessment tools to try to make this easier for people.
Right.
I'm already confused. A risk assessment tool, what does that exactly entail?
Yeah, there's a lot of different tools that are out there that are publicly available and private sector companies have created, but there's also best practices that have come out of courthouses. And so the statute is generic in that regard, because what we want is we want courts to be looking at the individual. Mm-hmm. We want them to be looking at the nature of the offense and all the other variables and factors that brought that person into the courtroom instead of just a sheet of paper, kind of like the one you have in front of you that says this offense gets that, period, end of discussion. If we've got a system where, as an example, the kid, he was wearing a hoodie and baggy pants, and somehow that was a violation of dress code, under a risk assessment model, there's no way that kid would ever see the inside of a courtroom.
Right.
A little fun fact that most people don't know this, but if you get pulled over for a speeding ticket, say you're going 45 and a 35, most people think that's not a jailable offense, but it is a misdemeanor, and it is. So if you take the ticket and you refuse to sign it, an officer can take you to jail if you refuse to sign the ticket. Now, they don't have to. There's no requirement that you sign the ticket, but they can.
And how often do you hear about that? I mean,
it does happen. It really does happen. So imagine going to jail. You don't have the money to pay the ticket or the fine, but you're going to jail and you're going to sit in jail for doing 10 miles an hour of the speed limit, even if it's for a day or two or three until the judge comes in on a Monday morning. It's still a non-jailable offense, and you're doing jail time, albeit you didn't have the money in your pocket, couldn't get someone to come down there to give you the money to get you out of jail. But if somebody comes in with a felony, if they come up with the 10% down, they can walk out for a felony.
Right.
So what bail reform is really looking at are all the misdemeanor offenses. So we're not talking about the big cases. It's not murder or rape or arson or aggravated burglary. I mean, this is all the low-level stuff where about half of the folks that are sitting in our county jails are for these types of offenses that probably wouldn't see the inside of a courtroom for a bond hearing like this. With a reform. So I think that's really where we're trying to go here is let's get some release and some relief at the local level, give counties and their judges the power to make reasonable, intelligent decisions instead of putting somebody in jail for nonsensical things, and let's focus on keeping our beds at our county courthouse and those jail cells for people who actually deserve to be in there instead of just your average person who is in jail because they're poor.
And going back to, as we had said earlier, those individuals who unfortunately may not be able to pay the ticket and now cannot pay that bail, what was something that would be expunged a few years later because your ticket falls off your record, now you have something that's on your record permanently for something as simple as you said, a 10-mile-an-hour.
Well, and I think the other thing that people don't know is that every time that you are arrested, even if it's a mistaken identity, that becomes a part of your permanent arrest record. So if we were considered twins for some reason,
I've seen it happen,
and you committed some offense, but they picked me up instead, and they're like, oh, sorry, got the wrong guy, and they let me go because I was arrested and booked. I now have a record for an activity that you did, not even I. So there's actually another bill that I'm a co-sponsor with that deals with that component, because in my view, if you are arrested, but you were the wrong person, mistaken identity.
Wrongful arrest,
right?
yes.
You have an identical twin and your twin does it and they go, oh, sorry, we have the wrong twin. You have the same arrest record as the guilty person forever. Makes no sense.
Not at all.
None whatsoever, right? So I think that's another part of when we're talking about creating pathways for opportunity for folks, when we're talking about giving people an opportunity, equality of opportunity and outcome, right? I mean, outcome is not realistically going to be equal because we're all different. We all have different skills. We all have different desires and wants and needs and all different types of education, which is a good thing, right?
Yes.
We don't want everybody being a car mechanic because I'd never find anybody to make me a dinner if I was really, really hungry.
Or plumbing.
Or fix my plumbing or, help me with the electricity in my house. So
exactly.
We've got to have a lot of diversity of workforce. But I think the reality of it is if we have these types of loopholes in our system that is punishing and criminalizing behavior, and then you have this long-term negative consequence for a mistake, then how are you supposed to get ahead, especially when you don't have the economic means to hire a good lawyer to do the sealing or the expungement? And so you're sitting there, they do the criminal background check, and you have an arrest for something that you didn't even do.
Right.
Or you sat in jail for several days for something that was non-jailable, right? So all of these things that we're talking about in the criminal justice space, whether it's former Senator Seitz and now my colleague in the House, or folks from up north and Representative Ginter and some others, you have to have a path to help people get ahead. It's the same thing with the human trafficking bill that we just are working through right now to finalize. You have to give people an opportunity to change their life and get a second chance if they've earned it. And you have to create that legal construct. And that's really what this is about.
In actuality, what I'm hearing is more that American dream accessibility. We're not perfect. Believe it or not, we're not.
Right.
But we may falter, we may make mistakes, but a minor mistake should not impede on a major enhancement in your life.
Right.
And this is what it's sounding like. Now, one of the comments you had made earlier was the sheet that I'm looking at, that it seems to be the go-to spreadsheet for bail bonds. Now, this is coming from Hamilton County, the one that I have in front of me. Varying counties do change a little bit, but they do follow the Ohio State statute. You had made mention that if we were to be able to read each case and to go through everything, that this basic spreadsheet would pretty much become null and void. Would it not?
In a large construct, yes. I mean, because here's the idea. If you're looking at the nature of the offense and you're looking at the individual, I mean, I'll give you a prime example. Folks that have gone through a divorce and there's a child support decree that's put on, by the time the court finishes its process, files the motion, it gets over to child support, did you know typically you're already about 90 days behind? That's just the way it works. That's the system. So when you get to a certain point, it automatically becomes criminal. So you're in the domestic relations court, you have a job, your spouse has a job, you get separated. They base the calculation not necessarily on who has custody per se, but how much money the household made combined. So if one was a higher earner than the other, even if it's shared parenting, and even if you're sharing everything equally, one will have to pay something to the other because you have two households now, and the kid, and I don't know about, for all those that have kids, they know they're expensive. And so, you have food to buy, you have diapers for babies, you've got school and school supplies and extracurricular activities, and when they get in their teenage years, especially the boys, they each out of house and home. Those things cost money. So the system automatically puts you behind. Well, you're right out of the gate, right on the cusp of having a violation. So a first offense child support violation could very well be a court paperwork issue, right?
Yeah.
And so under these guidelines, you could get picked up right now on your sheet, get picked up and have to do jail and have to bond out. Versus you're nonviolent, you've never done anything wrong in the past, and but for a court mistake on your child support calculation when the motions were filed and processed, now you have a misdemeanor offense. And so you're automatically going to go to jail. Well, that's wonderful. So now you're in jail, you can't show up to work, you lose your job, and now you're further behind.
And your family's in disarray.
And your family's already in disarray because it's getting broken up. But now you're further behind on your support obligation. There's penalties and interest, there's court costs and fines and fees and jail time that you have to do. All because of mistakes. And I've seen that happen in courtrooms. And it's not anyone's fault. It's just the system. And
Sure.
we need to this piece is one of many pieces to help reform that system so that it's fair and equitable. So when people have to use the legal system, whether it's a family law issue, whether it's a minor misdemeanor issue because you made a mistake, that the system is fair. It doesn't look at you based on the size of your pocketbook. It's not deciding that, oh, well, you're wealthy so you can get out of jail or you can get this expunged. That everyone has access to actual justice. In my view, we go down to the courthouse and we see Lady Justice and she's got the blindfold on and she has the scales. But in all reality, on one side of those scales is a big stack of $100 bills. And that's how I view this. And so we need to take the money off the scale so that it is balanced based on the facts and not based on how much money is in your wallet.
You have stated that this is just one of many pieces to rectify the judicial system here. Obviously, in that scenario we just went through, it is heart-wrenching. I mean, being able to help with the bonds is one thing, but are we looking at these other pieces? Divorce, smaller crimes, things like that, to as you say, make Ohio fair and balanced.
And I think we've come in here and had a lot of conversations over 3 years, and we've done that. I mean, we've gone through the foreclosure process. We've dealt with the vacancy and abandonment pieces that are around this community and across the state. We've created new programs and new ways that do not cost people money, that doesn't create a bureaucracy, that encourages private sector and homeowners to work together to solve their own financial problems. I mean, we've built tools for them, and there's zero cost to the taxpayer. I mean, that's the best part. We're creating pathways in bail reform to make sure that your pocketbook isn't dispositive of whether you get a recognizance bond, right? We're looking at cleaning up your arrest record when there's a mistaken identity. We're also looking at comprehensive criminal recodification, where we're going to look at a serious dive into removing mandatory minimums on jail sentences and giving judges the power to make fact decisions, for crying out loud. I always viewed it that the judge should be the arbiter of fact, not some legislator sitting in Columbus. Just because you have one bad fact pattern and the family comes doesn't mean that every single person who's charged with that offense should have the same punishment as the worst possible actor.
Not every peg fits in the
It
same
does not. No.
same hole.
No, and we need the judges and the parties in each case to make decisions based on what happened in that particular case. You can't take a single charge and apply it carte blanche when it comes to sentencing, whether it's bail, whether it's sentencing, whether it's doing jail time, the fines. There's a reason why there's a range of fines for most misdemeanor offenses, and there's a range of months. These aren't mandatory months in misdemeanor offenses. But when we get to felonies, we make everything mandatory, and it makes no sense that if it makes sense for a judge in municipal court to make a determination based on you as a human being, where you are in life, what you did, right? Then why aren't we doing the same thing in the felony court, giving the judge the ability to make those decisions based on where you are? Is this a first offense for you, or are you a lifer, right? I mean, those are prime examples. Typically, your first offenders are the ones that have never been in trouble in their life. They just confess
and
right out of the gate.
Probably pale and standing
and
there
they get
shaking.
the worst punishment because
Yes.
they confessed versus the frequent
lifer.
flyer mile
Yeah.
guy who's who could fly around the world based on how many times he's been arrested, knows when to say something and what not to say, and most often doesn't get the maximum punishment for those particular crimes because they know how the system operates.
The true meaning of playing the system.
Well, it's the nature of the way the world works. So what we need to be looking at is creating paths for judges to make those fact decisions. I mean, a lot of the people who oppose the concept is, well, what if the judge gets it wrong? I said, well, that's why we have elections. And quite frankly, I would like to know if my judge can make good decisions in a courtroom versus having to follow an instruction sheet. That would give us better judges and better people on the bench who are actually caring about the people that are in front of them, caring about not only the criminal side, but the civil side. People always forget about that. The civil side is equally important and arguably sometimes more important. Talk to someone who, had a check bounced against them, or who's a tenant or a landlord. Any party, any of those cases, at that particular moment, that's the most important thing in their life.
Sure.
And so we cannot ignore the civil side too.
From the sounds of it, it makes me believe that yes, our judges are doing their job because obviously that's what they're elected to do. However, it sounds like they're almost tied to, again, that magic spreadsheet on how to make their decisions. Is it not, as a lawyer and a representative, to you going in saying, no, let's let them do the job. Let the restraints off a little bit and let them do the job. Why have they been tied so closely to that?
Well, it's tough. I'll give you a prime example. Last General Assembly, we had there's a statute, it's called aggravated murder, and the penalties are 20 years to life or death. Right, so you're going to get at least 20 years. A really terrible fact pattern came into the committee process, and they wanted to change that so that it was definitive terms of 25, 35, 45, 55 years, hard definitive times with no parole options in there. And the family that came in, they had a tragic story. There was a movie that was out several years ago, probably when I was in high school or college. It was two boys who conspired to kill one of their friends in school to see if they could get away with it. I can't remember the name of the movie.
Murder by the Numbers?
Quite possibly, but I'm not sure. But these kids wanted to copy it. Yes. They wanted to copy it and see if they could get away with it. So they took their best friend. It was three guys, and they took one of their best friends, and they conspired to kill him. They did, and they buried the body somewhere. Long story short, of course, they caught the two that did it. It didn't take very long. The one kid who masterminded is awaiting the needle in Lucasville, and the other kid has life without parole. Okay, so I think the statute worked pretty much as it designed, right? But the family viewed the statute as though there was a long shot possibility that those two kids could have gotten out in 20 years. And in their view, that was unacceptable, and that was the impetus for changing the law and making people do more time. Now, I can think of a million different reasons why that's a bad idea. And fortunately, we had a young lady who came in to our committee process and explained why it was a bad idea. And here was a young woman who was 36, and she had just been released from prison for aggravated murder. She'd done 20 years. She was sentenced at 16. She was 36, just got out. Her story is a little bit different. From the time she was old enough to remember, her father came in and abused her in the most god-awful ways you can imagine. And it happened from the time she could remember. Her earliest childhood memory was that every day after work he would come home and do this to her. He'd get drunk and come home and just, I can't even, it's not appropriate to go through her facts.
Sure.
Here. But the long story short, when she was 16, he always had a handgun in his room on his nightstand, and she knew it and had always thought about doing that if he did it again. And that particular day she did. She took the weapon and discharged it and unloaded it. And the jury said, well, because you unloaded it, that it was premeditated. So they gave her 20 years. Okay. So in my view, you have a woman here who was victimized already in some of the god-awfulest, horrible ways possible that you wouldn't wish on your enemy. And the system failed her. The Children's Services failed her. Her family failed her. All the people that she reached out to for help failed her. And the criminal justice system put her in prison for 20 years.
And I hate to use this, where did she have to go?
She had nowhere else to go because she had tried every other option.
Right.
And so, again, wouldn't it be nice to have a judge who didn't have a piece of paper like you have in front of you, who could have said, you know what, this is a different type of case, and I want to handle this in a different type of way. And so whether we're talking about bail, whether we're talking about sentencing, whether about charging a crime and giving judges flexibility to deal with the facts that are in front of them, I think it's vitally important that we provide that flexibility. Justice shouldn't be based on how much money you have. Your opportunity for bail or your opportunity for a good presentation of your case shouldn't be dispositive of how much money you have. And so that's my view on all these bills. That's why we're working these things in piecemeal fashion to try to get as much done as humanly possible to provide that relief. My view is that opportunity in America should be blind with respect to your pocketbook. It should only matter how hard you're willing to work and how much you're willing to study and how much you're willing to improve yourself. And if you're willing to do that work, there's going to be some successes, but there's also going to be some failures. But I view failures as a lesson. It's not necessarily a negative.
Correct.
Sometimes when you fail, you learn more than getting it right the first time. So I want to create an environment that's fair for everyone. And where your access to the court system, your access to justice is based on what's in front of them and not based on any other variable.
You are watching the Columbus Report here on Waycross Community Media. I am joined with Representative Deaver from the 28th District. We're discussing the current HB 439, which is about bail reform. So if you are into some heavy discussion, as you can see already, we've hit some pretty hefty subjects here. Going ahead, you had said making this fair and equal for everyone. Everywhere I've read, from Cleveland to Columbus to Dayton, even here, everyone has looked and said that we're looking to make a fair Ohio when it comes to law. Should we not have been looking at that years ago?
I mean, obviously, we should be looking at that every single day. I think the challenge, of course, is always, and this isn't a partisan thing. This is just the way it is. I mean, politics is a very strange thing. Sometimes you have to say no, even though there's a real story. And I think that's the tough part, and that's hard to do sometimes. Take the prior example that I gave you with that young lady. Mm-hmm. You had a bill that's in front of the committee. When you hear that kind of testimony, you have to say no, that this is wrong. Quite frankly, we should be telling the sponsor, see that fact pattern right there? You need to change your bill to deal with that. And I think that's our biggest challenge as policymakers. We get so caught up in, what's being said either on Twitter or on social media, and we've lost something. The ability for someone to make fun of others and to blow them up and to call them names and to inside of this space, you would never do that face-to-face with that person. You would never act that way. And if you did, your mother would probably find you and adjust you appropriately. But sure. We live in this strange world where doing the tough,
almost free space.
It seems to be a space where anything goes. But when you're talking about policy making and you're talking about governing, this is really serious stuff. And it takes serious people who understand when you change something here, how it affects everything else. And I think that's what we've been missing for some time. I don't have an explanation for it, but I mean, when the first time we met, I said the reason why I'm going to Columbus is I'm not looking at this as a career thing, but I know that I'm in a place right now in the perfect district to represent what the state of Ohio looks like. This district reflects the state with the maybe with the absence of some farms, but
Well.
but this district, whether it's minority population, whether it's socioeconomic population, industry, et cetera, this district reflects the state, and so. I grew up here. I understand how these different communities think and feel, and I'm always constantly learning something from them. That's the best part. Wherever I go, I learn something new every day about a piece that I thought I understood, but I didn't, and that's why I really love it. Because every time I go around representing this district, the education that I get and the ability to work off of my strengths. And their strengths is something that I think is extremely positive, and you can see it in the legislation that we're running and have run over the last 2 terms. And these types of issues, the bail reform, foreclosure reform, the disability stuff that we're working on, whether it's a state and local government policy, whatever it is, these issues come out of the district, and they've been coming from here. And so my philosophy is the reason why we're having legislative success, the reason why I'm getting bills passed at pretty good numbers, is because they reflect the combined thoughts of people from all across political and socioeconomic spectrums. And it seems to work. So, I don't want to say that government can't be responsive, because that's not true. Government can be responsive. It's the issue is the appropriateness of the response.
Sure.
Right, and that's why I like the law. The law takes time, and what happens over time is that truth comes out, and fact comes out. It's really easy to respond with emotion in a few characters. Right. Yeah. It's another thing to think about it for a period of time. Do your homework, investigate it, and try to figure out how this thing is going to affect and impact people from different perspectives, whether it's socioeconomic, whether it's race, whether it's partisanship, whatever. But in my view, if a good policy should have consensus across all of those spectrums. If it does, then you've got a winner that's going to benefit people, whether it's jobs, education, business, what have you.
We've seen a lot of change, be it in the district, globally, what have you. Emotion has been a trigger for a lot of it. And as you say, things take time. They need to bubble, they need to kind of form and weed out. But in the society that we're in now, we are very much apt to react and not act appropriately. Do you feel that that is more of a hindrance now, even though you are making these great strides? Do you feel that the patience is paying off? Or are people not seeing that? They want that quick, immediate response.
I'm not so sure what the right answer to that question is. I think, look, I don't think anything's fundamentally changed between now and the time I was a kid or even 300 years ago. The difference is that the formats have changed and the speed with which you get the information has changed. I was a political historian in college, and some of my favorite races were Adams and Jefferson when they came at each other. Jefferson literally bankrupted his entire estate, borrowing so much money to buy the influence of the publishers of the time. He bought out the newspapers, wrote the articles trashing his best friend, and published them. Have things really changed that much? Or is it that we're just seeing it faster and in real time? I think that's the difference. And we also know where it's coming from versus then we really didn't. The transparency of it was different. And the education level of your average citizen was different. The environment was different. And the speed with which we gathered our information was different. So I'm not so sure that that's really the case. I think the reality of it is that good policy takes time. Mm-hmm. Governing takes time. Stewardship is one thing, and realistically, when you're in the legislature, you are a steward of the institution. You're a steward of the district. This elected seat does not belong to me. It belongs to the 125,000 people that have put me there for the last 2 terms. It's a great blessing, and I'm hopeful that I'm reflecting the best of the district and the policies that I run. That's all you can really hope for as a legislator. So I'm not really sure. I think the steady hand is the best approach. Somebody's got to steer the ship. You don't want you don't want the pilot of the aircraft going all over the place. You want them holding that thing steady until you get to where you need to be. So I think there's a balance on shining the light and leveraging the social media or the platforms that are available to shine light on what you're actually doing. It can be used for good or for bad, right? Anything can.
Anything can.
So I think it's the motivation of the individual that's behind it. I'm not necessarily concerned with the short-term ramifications of it. I think honestly that it can be a tool that is helpful and useful for folks. But more importantly, I view my job as kind of a citizen elected individual to go and do the best that I can do to carry out the reforms that I said we would try to do in 3 terms, and I'm on my way. So I thought, it'd take 3, maybe 4 terms to get this done, but I'm hopeful it's all done in 3, but we'll see. I mean, we still have the other 2 big pieces that we have to lift, and that'll have to come next cycle.
Well, and we're getting there. We're looking, continuing on the conversation with the House bill here. We've talked in regards to all the varying pieces. One piece that we haven't discussed was in regards to the Ohio Criminal Sentencing Commission, which is going to be a key factor to all of this. It was a part of the Ohio Supreme Court that was created in 1990 to try to make sure that everybody was on, in layman's terms, to make sure everybody was on the same page, from attorneys to judges to everything. How are they going to play into this bill a little bit more?
They've already been looped in on the original process. I mean, they're going to be an interested party, obviously. But it's going to be a very interesting, eclectic group of folks. I would think at the end of the day, I had a call the other day about this, and it's kind of like a civil asset forfeiture last term. It's going to bring some strange bedfellows together, right? Things that you wouldn't automatically assume. You're going to have people from the political left, the political right, people down the middle, who are all concerned with access to justice and equality of justice and fairness inside the justice system. So I view the commission and those particular parties as all interested parties, all equally welcome to the table to have their perspectives laid out. I mean, the nice thing about the bill is that it doesn't prescribe a solution. It provides flexibility at the local level so that the judges in that system, whether it's Hamilton County, Lucas County, Vinton County, county court or a major metropolitan area, has the ability to take on a tool that makes sense for their area to get to the point of the bill, which is providing that relief at the local level and making a real decision instead of just rubber stamping someone because they were processed. And I think that's really the big issue is let's get these folks, the people who need to be bonded, let's get them bonded. The people that need to be released, let's get them released. And a lot of common sense can play into this realistically when you start thinking about some of these types of offenses. But that's what those risk assessment tools are for, is to balance all of those issues and to provide some sort of construct for that local judge when they're making that decision.
And as you were saying, get the higher ones taken care of, get the lower ones taken. Now that frees up space. What does that then, at that point, bring to the justice system for our county? Are we now? We're not. As I remember, Mr. Seitz always saying, it's not a conveyor belt, which was boom, boom, done, boom, boom, done. Now we're looking at the cases, looking deep. Can we then get to, as you've said in many instances tonight, get to the heart of what's the matter?
I would think so.
All of this?
I would think so. In some of these counties, some of the statistics we're looking at is 54% relief at the local jail. That's incredible, if that's accurate. That's an incredible amount of tax dollars that are relieved.
Sure.
We have counties like ours where we can't find beds for people who actually did something.
Correct.
And then in other counties, they're filling up the beds full of people who haven't done anything to keep the place full. We also have a huge heroin epidemic that we have a legitimate issue for.
Right.
We've got mental health issues. Right now it's in the single digits outside, and we have people who have mental health issues that are out on the street and they're homeless, and we don't have a way of helping them. So there's some local dollars there that aren't going to be expended that we now have some flexibility with too. So when we talk about looking at creative ways of alleviating some of these pressures at the local level, this one makes a heck of a lot of sense. I mean, if you're looking at up to 50% flexibility on your bed space at the local level, that's a big savings. So what does that translate into real dollars? I don't know yet. I mean, that'll come as the bill moves. We'll kind of get a sense of that when we send out our requests to the local counties and the local county jails and the sheriff's offices. But just that flexibility alone and that release at the local level gives our county commission flexibility at that point to invest the dollars in ways that they think is best for the county. Likewise, the commissioners across the state.
As I had been doing my research and reading, obviously you're getting a lot of support outside of the House. Again, press is saying this is a good thing. Inside the House, what are you seeing? And obviously, once this passes, it has to go to the Senate.
Sure.
What are you sensing on that side?
I don't think this is going to be a controversial bill internally. I really don't. I think this bill will have a lot of bipartisan support. We're going to have the committee process start up next week. So we're looking at moving this thing consistently. So I'll be calling the chairman every week to keep asking for those hearings to make sure that this thing moves. I don't think that we're going to have a lot of opposition. I think there might be the bail bondsmen have indicated that they'd like to participate and they have some concerns, and I get that because the misdemeanors, if half of the folks don't have to go to jail, that's probably some business they're losing, and I understand that. And so they're going to have some concerns over the language of the bill, and that's fine. They're welcome to come and have conversations. But at the end of the day, the spirit of the bill is to provide that relief to the poorest of us that are sitting in jail because of literally a lack of funds in their back pocket. Those types of things shouldn't be happening in our state, and they shouldn't be happening in our country. That's not justice, in my view. Lady Justice is not blind. She's lifted the blindfold on one side, and there's money on that thing when it comes to bail. And I don't think that's right, and we definitely need to make a change here.
And again, that'll be happening soon. You're going to be discussing things. When will this go to vote?
We don't know for sure. I would love to see this thing move through the committee process in the next month and a half. To get a floor vote sometime in mid to end of February would be great. That would still give us time to theoretically run through the Senate before we break for the summer.
Well, and I know that's the concern because, as you say, things take time.
There's only so many days. But again, this bill has been a work in progress for over a year. Mm-hmm. So I never introduce a bill without having that back work done.
Correct.
That's one of the main reasons why I can tell you with relative confidence that when I've introduced a bill, I have a reasonable expectation of where it's going to go and when, based on the nature of those early party meetings and the evolution of the legislation. So I know the bill has full support of leadership, so the speaker's behind it. I know he wants to make sure that this gets done. So in my view, that's a win right there. So we're off to the races. We'll see how fast it may. Hopefully, maybe when we come back, it'll be through the floor and onto the Senate. That'll be my hope.
By the time you'll be back on here, we should see some progress on that.
Yes, sir.
That'd be perfect. You did make mention of a former bill that we did discuss the last time you were sitting here, which was in regards to the human trafficking. How has that progressed, and where are we?
Yes, it's this has been a labor of love, as you know, since last General Assembly. So we worked diligent. Just to give an update, last General Assembly, this thing did not get its vote. It was literally 2:30 in the morning on our last day, and then it got pushed onto this General Assembly. There was a disagreement on some of the impact of some of the language when it comes to types of offenses that were theoretically expungible, albeit I believe in judicial discretion, and I've always said that. There were certain members that said, well, is it possible for XYZ to be expungible? And theoretically, but in my view, that's on the judge to make that decision, and I highly doubt in some of those offenses the judge would. So where we are now is the Senate had as a companion bill, they've passed their version. Both of these are in the House Criminal Justice Committee, and so we were thinking we would get a committee vote right before we left for the break for Christmas. The chairman decided to push it off to this month to see if there was more consensus that we can build on the Senate side. The Senate and House version are different, so we're trying to work that out now. In my view, I don't really care which one is the vehicle. I just want something done.
Just something done.
Yeah. I mean, would it be great to have my name on it theoretically? But in my view.
But that's not the point.
It's not the point of why I'm here, and it's not the point of what I'm doing. So the bill itself would provide paths for expungement for victims of human trafficking. So young ladies, young boys who've been victimized, They get picked up for solicitation charges, maybe a minor drug offense, maybe a petty theft or whatever in the course of being trafficked. This statute, once they get out and the judge says, you've cleaned your life up, gives them a path to expunge those records so they can get a job.
Yes.
I mean, getting employed is key. If they don't get a good paying job at the tail end of this, they're going to end up right back in that life. And statistically, then if they go back, they're going to more likely to be drug overdosed. And
as I say, you're going to be finding them someplace else, and it's not going to be.
And they're going to be in the public health system because the diseases they contract through shared needles and also transmitted diseases through the activity. So the idea being here is to let's get these people out when they want a second chance in life and they're ready for it. Then let's get them their records sealed and cleaned so they can go get employment. And that's really the nature of the bill. We're really now just arguing technical components on what types of offenses really should be not sealable or expungible. So there are certain offenses that people view, as an example, like an act of bioterrorism. Should we allow that to be sealed or expunged? I mean, I would obviously say, I would, as a judge, I would never seal or expunge that because I can't imagine a fact pattern where someone would take you there, or where because of your victimization you were taken there. But then again, because I can't envision it. I've
never been in that space.
I've never been there, and I can't envision that either. So that's really the conversation: is do we want to have judges? Do we want to give them carte blanche authority to make those decisions? Because even though I can't fathom one right now, is it possible? I mean, I don't know. I mean, anything's possible, I guess, in life. But so that's the question: is are there a certain list of things that we don't want to include versus giving those judges 100% discretion to make that decision? So we're still kind of working through some of those details on some of the higher level offenses that, quite frankly, if you were convicted, you probably wouldn't get out of jail anyway, let alone have the ability to seal it or expunge it. You'd be in jail for probably your rest of your life.
Right.
You would never get out, regardless.
Yeah.
So the idea that you would be able to seal or expunge it probably when you're 85 years old is a little bit, cart and horse argument, but it's a legitimate discussion that's occurring. But then again, if it's an arrest and there was, mistaken identity or you arrested the wrong person and it's an arrest, I really don't have a problem with someone sealing a record or expunging a record where the arrest record did not lead to a charge, especially after a reasonable amount of time has elapsed, especially if the statute of limitations has told on that particular charge. They can't prosecute you anyway, and if it was part of your human trafficking, then perhaps it should be a discussion for a judge and a prosecutor to have. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. It just means it's available for a conversation. So that's really kind of where we are. We're debating that particular nuance of the law in the last waning moments of the committee process. So hopefully we'll have an answer for you when you get back or when we come back in the spring. But I'm not sure yet. This is a tough issue to noodle.
Sure.
A lot of how many angels on the head of a pin when it comes to this one.
Good point. Good point. We've been discussing some heavy discussion here today at the round table. Anything lighthearted we might want to end today with?
Sure. Last time we were here, I announced the joint resolution that we were going to pass, or the House resolution rather, that we were going to put up for our disability community to have an opportunity to serve in the armed forces. So that has been introduced. So we will have committee hearings sometime this month. So I'm looking forward to that moving through. I've talked to General Stivers, who's also a congressman from the Columbus area. He's excited about it. He recognizes that there are a lot of people who should and could serve our country and under uniform, but for the fact they can't do the push-ups or run a couple of miles. If you're disabled in the military and say you become paralyzed from the waist down, or they will make accommodation for you to maintain your uniform and continue to work. So, there's really no reason that if a guy or a gal has a unique skill, except for their disability, would be able to serve in a non-forward capacity, that we should be denying them the opportunity to wear the uniform. So I think this thing will go. I think it'll get some legs and it'll run. I mean, the senator or the general and also congressman is excited about it. I'm going to be sending that resolution off to our congressional delegation in Ohio and also our two senators and encourage them to do something at the federal level. So I think the House will move it quickly and then we can get it to them.
Considering you have someone in uniform who has seen one side of the curtain that most of us do not,
and is able to say, yes, that is definitely something we in the military could use, I think that's a win in your column.
Well, I think so. I mean, like I said, my view, this is in that bucket of helping. How do you help people who can't help themselves, right? So this is in that bucket, and there are a lot of folks that have a disability who can't serve for something minor. Maybe they've got a bad ankle or a bad knee or degenerative arthritis in their leg, but they're fully capable in so many other ways, and we're denying people opportunities because of some sort of disability. In the private sector, it's mandated that you provide them a reasonable accommodation. I mean, you have to provide the keyboard or raise the desk, put some wood blocks under it, raise the desk so the wheelchair can get under it. We have to do that in the private sector. But then the military makes these decisions based on the fact that you can't do this physical requirement.
Right.
And it's a recent phenomenon. It wasn't always that way.
Which is a weird, balance there, don't you think?
It is a strange, but you view, depending on the type of service that you're in, the different branches, for every forward person, it can be up to 16 people in support.
Right.
So, if you have somebody who's a computer genius who's in a wheelchair, and that person wants to wear a uniform, I'd much rather have them working on our side,
yes,
right, than doing anything else, unless they want to be in the private sector. But if they want to serve, and they have the means to provide a service to our country, we should let them. So that bill, I think, will find its way to the floor, and then it'll go off to the Treasury or the Secretary of Defense and the President and both houses of Congress. And then the last piece that we're working on, the disability space, is really trying to needle out on the transportation and then the housing issues. Over in the last 5-6 years, there was a move at the federal level that if you were in a group home, to remove people from group homes. And the thought process was that if they're more integrated in society, then somehow they will do better. And that may work for some, but not all. Again, it's another one of those one-size-fits-all. Sounds really good, but doesn't really work when the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
And some of these folks really need their facilities, and they're doing well there. And so this piece of legislation that we're looking at doing is going to be a massive, massive lift, but it's dealing with all of those funding sources in the way that we deal with our disabled, from the services that they obtain, and also the transportation services that are woefully underfunded and woefully inadequate for most people who have special needs. There's, you need to have certain types of folks transporting them across the county, and those resources just aren't there. So we're looking at different ways of dealing with it. One of the ideas I threw out there is, see if we can work with Uber or Lyft and try to find a way to have a medically accessible transportation option for them too.
Sure.
So we're working through a lot of those. Really complicated topic because it interweaves state and federal monies and state and federal policy. So we'll see. I mean, I'm looking forward to that one as well.
What a great way to use modern transportation or modern transportation means in something that is absolutely necessary. I mean, it does make sense, and you're employing somebody else. You're getting
Absolutely.
There's another job involved in there. So, jobs moving forward in Ohio.
Well,
in that
you
way.
figure there's a lot of families that have handicap accessible vehicles that
Sure.
can't use them except for when they're transporting their loved one.
Right.
So, when we're talking about automated cars in the future, where I have my vehicle, so while we're here talking, it's out driving people around, and then it comes back and gets
back
me.
for you.
The same kind of concept should hold true, that if you have a handicapped accessible vehicle that's ready to go and it's certified by the state, and you want to use it to help alleviate some of that pressure, it's a conversation we should be having.
Right.
Now, where that goes, I'm not sure. We're still working through some of that. The challenge always with dealing in this space is you have so many people who come to the table, and everybody has a different perspective based on their particular circumstances. So, crafting legislation in the disability space is always very, very tough because there's so many different types of disabilities, and they're all over the place. Dealing with autism is not the same thing as Down syndrome or spina bifida or any of these other various disabilities that have different levels of and continuums of care. So it's a big issue.
The spectrum
It's
really
massive.
fits everything.
It's massive, yes.
I can only imagine. But it sounds like we are making great strides to start out the new year. To make things fair and balanced, as everyone has said in many of the articles that I read. Well, we look forward to seeing that, and we will definitely, by the time we get back down here in the spring, we will probably see some new legislation moving forward, especially some information that you've learned here this evening,
Let's
as
hope.
well as what we've discussed before.
Thank you much.
No problem. Thank you for joining us. As always, I enjoy our conversations. And I want to thank all of you for joining us as well. You have been watching the Columbus Report here on White Cross Community Media. If you're interested in getting involved, 2018 is a brand new year. Give us a call, 825-2429. Be a volunteer. Create your own programming. Put your voice on television or around the world. Here we are at Waycross. Anyway, we have been here watching and learning the great things that the state of Ohio is doing for you here on the Columbus Report. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next time.